right, so what we have here is the simple way to do this job. This would simply, all we're doing is we're going to install a T so that this goes into where our sensor normally mounts. Our sensor then goes into this, and we simply install a pressure gauge in the top. That's going to be the simple way. There is a more intense way that I prefer to do with my vehicles. It just makes it a little cleaner under the hood. But this is what we start with. So first of all, you obviously need to go buy a pressure gauge. You probably won't be buying one like this. Most people will purchase something closer to this. It's a remote mount one. You normally mount in your dash or on your dash somewhere. Bought at any auto parts store. Okay? But for my purposes, I'm using one that I just have laying around. Okay, you're going to need a T. This T has male threads on one side, has female threads on the opposing side, and coming out the top has female threads as well. They are 1/8 inch pipe thread, which is something you need to make sure if you do go buy a gauge, make sure it has 1/8 inch pipe thread, as that's what we'll be working with, and it makes it just keeps it the simplest. Okay, this T can be purchased at hardware stores. I believe this one came from Home Depot probably 10 years ago. Okay, you're going to need some type of pipe thread sealant. I prefer liquid. Some people will use pipe thread, tape, which is not a bad idea. I prefer not to use tape. It's just one less thing to be floating around in my oil. Okay, you are going to need some type of a carburetor cleaner, brake cleaner, anything like that. Something that dries quick. You're going to need a shop towel. In my case, a cut up shirt. And you're going to need a spud wrench or an adjustable wrench. You may, if you want, you can go get the specific wrench sizes you need. I find it simplest just to use a spud wrench. You may even grab two, one that's a little smaller. That way you can break it loose with the big one and then work it with the small one. Okay? Alright, so we're over here on the passenger side of the motor. Okay, if you look up some, there is we're next to your dipstick. Okay, we have your distributor, and if you look down on the block between the two, you will see we have the oil pressure distribution plug. Okay, this is your oil pressure sensor. Some of you will have a newer model. I will show you what that looks like here in just a second. Okay, but on this particular model, it's an 89 Jeep Cherokee. It has the big honking sensor. So what we're going to do first is we're going to actually reach down here and we're going to unplug this sensor. Okay, move that wiring out of the way. The less we have in the way, the better off we are for keeping it clean. The next, we're rocking our carburetor cleaner. Okay, we're going to spray down in there really nice and good. Don't be afraid to use a lot. Clean that sensor off while you're there. Try not to breathe in too many of the fumes. And then we're going to grab our shop rag. We're going to try to clean up right around on that plug. All the way around, just as much as we can. Try to get it as clean as possible. Wipe off the sensor. We're there. Why not clean it too? Okay. Now, we're actually going to be taking the sensor out of the plug right here. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to grab our handy dandy adjustable wrench, also known as an adjustable hammer. And once we get it to the right size, we'll get it on. Okay, flip it around so that I actually have room. And we're going to just twist that sensor off. As you can see, it's quite tight in here for a large wrench. That's why I suggested maybe break it loose with the big wrench, come back in with a small wrench, and loosen her up a little and work her all the way out with a short wrench. Gives you a little more room, a little easier access. One thing to keep in mind while you're looking for a oil pressure sensor is if you are going to be mounting it on the engine, you want to look for a smaller sensor just to keep it out of your way. You don't want anything happening where you have to where it's in the way when you're trying to do an oil change, where it hits anything. And once you get it loose, we can just twist it out. Comes out nice and easy. All right. All right, so right here we have our sensor. Clean the threads off real good. Okay. Then we also have our T, our little T, brass T block that we bought at Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace. Take your pick. Okay, we're going to put a little bit of thread sealing on that. Okay, just a nice little bead most of the way around. Try to, maybe you can spread it around some. Okay. And then we're going to come down here. All right, and it is going to thread in place of your sensor. So it'll be the first item that gets installed. Okay, you're going to thread it in. Get it as tight as you can by hand. Grab your wrench and tighten it down the rest of the way. And if you're like me, you'll struggle. No matter how many times you do it. Okay, and these don't need to be super tight. That's one misconception most people have about pipe thread, is you got to really wrench on it. If you use some sort of a sealant, it doesn't need to be super duper tight. All you're going to do is pull your threads out. So the best is just to get her good and snug to where you're feeling a good amount of resistance. Okay. All right, we're going to look just like that, all right? Now we're going to come back over here. And we're going to add a little bit of thread sealant to our handy dandy sensor. The one that we're worried is going to fail on us and worry us to death, and maybe make it so that we call a tow truck and spend a few $100s on something that you don't need. Alright, and then it's going to go back in the same orientation it was. And some of you may find it handy to actually tighten that distribution block, this right here. That way it's a little closer to the side of the block, not covering your oil filter, because it can make it more difficult to actually remove your oil filter for an oil change. I know I like it to be simple doing an oil change, and having stuff in the way is not what I want. Again, doesn't need to be super tight. You just want it good and tight. Give you a torque spec, but to be honest, torque spec varies. So we've got her nice and tight. All right, next is our pressure gauge. We're gonna give a little bit on it, not a lot. And spread it around. I know some of you won't spread it around. That's okay too. I just like to spread it some. Okay. And then it's just going to go in the top hole right here. If I can get it. Okay, and that's where the short wrench comes in handy. Maybe even something a little smaller. It's okay. But now, as you can see, it's installed. I'll come back in and tighten it after the fact. Then you're just gonna get this and you're gonna reorient it. If you have one of these ones, it's a single plug. And it's offset, so you're going to want to make sure that you get it so that it goes on, and then it can kind of go around and seal around the outside right there. And you now have a manual oil pressure gauge installed, just in case your electric oil pressure sensor gauge on your dash quits working. In a second, we'll fire it up and see how she works. Alright, so as you can see, we now have the Jeep running. As you can see, it's just about 40 psi in here, which is probably pretty close to accurate. She's a bit noisy, but as we look, we have oil pressure reading right there. It says just above 45. So all in all, now you have a backup just in case your Jeep suddenly reads 0 on the dash. Pop the hood, take a look. But this is Josh for now saying good luck. Hopefully you don't need this. Bye. Alright, so as you can see, this is my wife's Jeep. It is running. It says 0 psi, which would be very problematic for anybody that's not wanting to blow up their engine, except one quick little peek over here and my oh my, 25 psi right there. As you can also see, this Jeep has the newer sensor, which is much smaller, more compact. It's beyond, you know, the mid 90s, late 90s 4.0s.